All right, so kind of so far in lecture, um, we have mainly been talking about the actual like physical infrastructure, right? And so hopefully now that we've gone through talking about generators and the transmission and the distribution system, you guys have some familiarity with the actual sort of like physical stuff that helps our grid to provide electricity. Um, and starting today, we're going to talk about sort of how the grid actually runs and sort of the mechanics of the operation behind all of the physical infrastructure to actually provide us that electricity, right? And so today we're going to be talking about markets as well as some of the key operators in our electricity system. So this is going to be, I think, a fairly dense topic today. And we're going to be starting first off with energy markets. Okay, and so I think the concept that I want to start with is, so we've seen this map many times, right? And so this is a representation of all the power plants, power generators, right, in the country. So we're over here in Davis somewhere, right? Okay, and so, if I were to point to any particular dot, I think at this point you guys will be familiar, right, with, okay, I can tell you a little bit of information about what type of generator that is, and you could even maybe tell me a little bit about that physical infrastructure that might connect a particular generator to, demand here. Okay, but how do I know if I'm, in Central California here, is it, this generator that turns on, or is it this generator or this generator? How do I know which one is actually providing me the electricity, or at least responding to my needs, right? And so we're actually gonna start off today. We're gonna play a little bit of a game to kind of demonstrate how this works. Well, this is a little dispatch game that I made many years ago. And so each of you guys are gonna be a power plant operator, and you're gonna produce some amount of electricity, and whatever you produce is gonna have a corresponding fuel price, okay? And your objective as an individual power plant owner is to make as much money as possible, right? We are free market capitalists, right? And so the more electricity that you sell, then ostensibly the more money that you can make. All right, you're not allowed to communicate with other people. This is not a monopoly, right? And then I am going to be acting as an independent system operator. Okay, so I'm going to explain a little bit more later on about what exactly an independent system operator is. But I'm going to choose which of you guys I'm going to buy power from. Okay? So here's the rules. You write down on a piece of paper, you don't have to write it, just keep it in your head, a price, and that represents your bid into the market. And so what should the price be that you bid into the market? Well, that's up to you. And I'm gonna kind of leave it up to your imagination about what the right strategy is, okay? So I, as an independent system operator, so you guys are all power plants, and I need to fulfill some load demand. I'm not actually gonna tell you how much demand that is. You'll find out. And so some amount of electricity to fill demand, and I'm gonna choose to turn on power plants based on who's providing me power at the cheapest price, okay? So if you bid like $2 or something and you're the lowest bid, I'm gonna turn you on first, okay? And I'm gonna continue turning on power plants, right, until I get all of the power that I need. And once I fulfill all of that demand, everyone gets paid. Everyone who produces power gets paid. Okay, this is the most important part though. the amount that you get paid is not what you bid. The amount that you get paid is what is known as the clearing price. The amount you get paid is the final bid, okay? So if you bid $2 and then I turn you on, and someone else bids $4 and then I turn them on, and then we're done, you who bid $2, you get paid $4, okay? And then you actually, I don't know, potentially make a profit, maybe not, okay? Any questions? Yes.
Are there any other constraints?
Nope, that's it. Yes.
Does the individual power plants have their marginal cost or anything like
Yeah, so pull out your cell phones or go on your laptop, go to this site, and you will get assigned a random generator, okay? Just click once, whatever you get is what you get. Don't keep clicking until you get your favorite power generation unit. Okay. And I'm going to
Decide a price.
you guys get to decide the price. Okay. I'll give you guys a moment to think about what you think your right strategy should be.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Any questions? We'll have a bid in mind.
No, not really.
Not yet? Okay, I'm gonna give you guys 30 more seconds. Think carefully. Game theory, what's the right price? Yeah.
What's the expected demand? So all ISOs will give a demand curve ahead of the.
I'm a mean ISO. I'm not gonna tell you. See someone trying to game the system over here. No, well, we'll see, right? Yes. Make some money, right? Okay, I'm gonna call time.
Yes.
Hopefully everyone has a price in mind. Okay, who bids $0? Anybody? $0? No takers. How about, wait, you raise your hand? Okay, sweet. All right, so at $0, tell me how much capacity you have.
125.
125. Got it. Cool. Next up, $1.
125.
Okay, 125. Next up, $2, $3. $3? Okay. How much capacity? 100. Okay. $4, $5, $10, 15. Okay, tell me what your bid is, because it's between 10 and 15, I assume.
Yeah.
Or
14.3.
14. Wow, very specific.
Alright.
No, I like it. Capacity?
700.
700. Cool. Yes.
$11.
$11. Okay, I'm gonna put you down here. Capacity?
200 megawatts.
200. Okay.
Just to be clear, is this a day-ahead market or?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Okay. So I said 15. Let's say, oh, you're
No, I'm
16. Okay, 16.
16.09.
16. Wow, very specific. Very good. Capacity?
800.
800. Okay. 20. Anyone under 20? Yes. 19. Okay. And how much capacity? 1,500. Okay, what are we at here? 3,000, 3,300, 35, 36. Okay. Anyone at $20? 21? 21. Okay. 1,500. All right. And with that, I'm gonna say we fulfilled all of the demand that's needed. Okay? So our final clearing price is $21, which means that everyone who provided electricity here gets paid 21 times your capacity, okay? And then all the rest of you guys did not end up getting dispatched, but you can try again in another game, maybe. Okay, question. So all of these people who bid in, is anyone's fuel price higher than $21? And you got dispatched or no?
No.
Oh, Savim. No, you didn't. So okay. So of the people who did get turned on, none of you guys have over $21 fuel costs. Congratulations, you guys all made money. That doesn't always happen when I play this game. But I will say maybe there's some self-selection. You guys are all maybe interested in the grid and knowledgeable about it to some extent, right? So yeah, in some cases, right, if you bid a price that is higher than if you bid a price that is lower than your fuel cost, what might happen? What if the clearing price is lower than your fuel price? What happens to you and your profits?
You've promised energy, but you're not making a profit on it?
Yeah. You are producing electricity at a loss, right? What if you, okay. Did anyone who didn't get dispatched have a fuel cost under $21? No? Good job. So what happens if I bid a lot higher than my fuel price? What happens if the clearing price is between my fuel price and what I bid? Then I don't get turned on, right? Because I bid too high, and I've lost opportunity to make some money, to either break even or make some money, right? So what is the right strategy for this game? Bid your marginal cost, right? The 1, 3, 11, you guys, did you guys bid your marginal costs?
What is that?
The marginal cost is the cost that it to produce a unit of electricity for you, aka the fuel cost.
Just above it.
Right. So what was your fuel cost?
$10.52.
$10.50, and you bid 11.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this strategy is pretty close to good, but imagine, sorry, you said $10.50?
52 cents.
52 cents, so $10.52. So imagine that the clearing price was like $10.60. You maybe could have lost some opportunity to produce a small amount of profit there, right? And so that's why the correct strategy in these games is to actually bid exactly your marginal cost. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, why?
Okay, so
Like, I'm not making any money if I just bid exactly my fuel price, right?
No, you're making.
so yours was 1052. Let's say you had, just for the purpose, 200. I can do that math. 200. So let's say that you bid at $11, and someone else bids at $10.70. Okay, and they produce the last amount of electricity that is needed. And so, let's say that the clearing price is 1070. Had you actually bid your fuel cost, then you could have made the delta between this two, so 18 cents times 200. So that's equal to 36. So you could have made $36 if you bid your fuel price, and the clearing price is slightly above that. But because you bid at $11, someone else cut you off, and you got nothing, right?
It's like the price is right.
Yeah, kind of.
What was the price of that?
Your question is, well, why would I bid exactly my fuel price? So imagine that this is your clearing price, right? In which case, you get paid the same amount that it costs you to produce electricity, so you net make nothing. Well, in that particular case, it doesn't necessarily hurt or harm you, but you put yourself in a position to avoid things like this happening. Does that make sense? So to put yourself in the best position, the optimal strategy is to bid your sort of marginal cost. Yeah.
So I guess I have follow-up questions on this. Why would we all get paid the clearing price and not just the price that we bid?
Yes. So that is the way that the market is designed. The economic theory there, right, would be you're essentially giving an incentive to provide power in the cheapest way, right? Otherwise, it would make no difference to provide power as like a expensive oil plant compared to, let's say, like a cheaper solar plant. They would all get paid the same. But because one of those produces electricity cheaper, this particular mechanism rewards you for being able to produce cheap power, right? It's more likely to get selected, yes. Yeah. So if you produce electricity cheaper, you have a greater chance of producing electricity to meet load demand. And so there's this inherent incentive that's baked into the fact that at the clearing price, you'll end up getting paid more. Make sense?
Yeah, and why is there an opportunity to bid at all?
Why is there what?
Why is there, if the logic is to always bid at your fuel cost, then why is there an opportunity to bid at all if your bid is already decided by what your fuel cost is?
So it will get a little bit more complicated than that, because your marginal cost is not necessarily just your fuel cost, but it could include other things like operations and maintenance and that sort of thing, as well as there is some other, there are some mechanisms outside of the market, well, like parallel to the market, that may actually influence the way that you kind of make your bids. But the idea for this particular example is to bake in the fundamentals, right? This is like essentially the way the market is structured, is to be based on your marginal costs.
Yeah, it's like a whole industry.
Yes. Yeah.
Is marginal cost synonymous with like operational cost?
Yeah. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and I will say, yeah. If you do want to know more specifically about the market, yeah, there is. So Jim Bushnell teaches a really great class. I talked to him about this class that I was teaching. He was like, "You can do markets in one day? That's crazy." So we'll see. Yeah, the other thing that I'll mention, I had something that's slipping my mind now. Okay. I think it'll come up later. But the basic idea here, operational costs are essentially what you're bidding. Oh right. Also, these generators don't actually have insight. Like bids into KAISO are what's the term for it? They're like confidential, right? You're not allowed to have insight into other people's bids because that's like there's a risk of like collusion and like market manipulation if a bunch of generators like get together and decide, hey, actually we should all like bid a lot higher, and so we can get more profits, right? So yeah, there are bits of like market power to think about too, and there's going to be some examples we'll talk about that where we've seen that actually happening. Okay, so that's like the core fundamentals of like the grid economics, right? So generators submit offers, and the system operator is the one who will solicit those offers and then decide which power plants are going to turn on in order to meet load. Okay, and so ISO clears the bids at the clearing price that I was mentioning, right? So that's the final bid price in order to meet forecasted demand based on this least cost dispatch. And then there's other sort of complicating factors there subject to grid constraints. Right, so this is how our energy market determines which power plant gets dispatched. So if I go back to my original question of like looking at the map, oh, which generators actually provide electricity for Davis? It is based on essentially the cheapest power plant that's going to be able to increase their output a little bit to provide that electricity. Subject to grid constraints, which we're going to talk about. Yeah, and so the other reason why we decide to turn on power plants at the lowest cost, and I think this is maybe a more direct answer to your question, is because we want society to be paying the lowest cost for electricity, right? And this is the way to incentivize that. And if you were to use other mechanisms to dispatch power in, let's call it, in an inefficient way, or I should say in a more costly way, that just means that people will be, at the end of the day, paying more for their electricity. Okay? Yeah?
What if the cheapest electricity is the dirtiest one? Like, how would you?
That's what you get. So this is an important question because the market as I've thus far described it does not think necessarily about the consequences of the type of power being dispatched, as long as it's the cheapest. You can bake into the market signals to, for example, price something like emissions, and so that might be where like a carbon price could play a role in the market. So that is like one design to not only say, I care that you're the cheapest, but I also care that you're the cleanest. And there's a trade-off between like how much more am I willing to pay for cheap power versus clean power, and you can put that into like a apples to apples basis by like having a carbon price. Yeah. There's other mechanisms that are commonly used that we're going to talk about as well. Yes. Did you also have a question?
It seems like this is guaranteeing that you're paying for the most expensive electricity?
No, this is guaranteeing that you're paying for the cheapest electricity. So if you accept for now that generators bid based on their fuel prices or on their operating costs, then the things that cost the most to produce electricity are going to get turned on last.
So like natural gas peaker plants?
Or oil peaker plants are going to be.
Despite everyone getting paid $21 a megawatt.
Yeah, actually, yeah. So there's actually a little thing that may be what you're alluding to. In the United States, in this particular country and in many countries, and I will say most developed countries, load must equal demand, right? And so doing something like shedding load is like not considered a viable, like a normal thing that you could do, right? Which means that supply must turn on to meet load. So let me ask you guys a theoretical question. So how many of you, there are you, who had the highest fuel price amongst all of you guys? Who thinks that they had the highest? How much was yours? 34. How much was yours?
40.
40? Anyone higher than 40? Okay. So let's say I'm the system operator, and it's like, oh crap, demand is really high. You're on, you're on, you're on. I'm turning everyone on. I'm turning everyone on. Okay, we're almost there. You're the last one. I need you. I need to turn you on.
I need to.
Yeah. So please, give me that last bit of electricity. What's your bid?
$1,000.
Yeah, right? The last person can be like, yeah, screw it. You need me? I charge you $10 quadrillion per megawatt.
And at the state too.
And right? And we don't shed load in this country, so I have to turn you on. And now all of you guys are beyond rich, right? So we actually have a ceiling on what you can bid. And that, yeah, that has happened before. So.
But to make it green, you could apply a carbon tax on top of the marginal cost.
Yes, so that was what I was mentioning before, right? So in the way that we have set it up, it doesn't care right now about emissions, but if you add in a carbon price, then yes, you could then dispatch not only based on how expensive you are, but how clean you are as well. Yep. Okay. So the way that I'm kind of introducing this is kind of at the sort of foundational level about how it works, and then we're going to like layer in complexity kind of a little bit at a time. So this particular piece we'll talk in a little bit more detail later, but the idea is actually, so when we think about this dispatch market, it actually happens in several sort of different layers. And so I, as the system operator, first am going to be like, oh, I'm going to think about what I'm going to need in advance for 24 hours. And why would I do that as opposed to just like turning things on as the load comes up and down? Why might we have separate, what are known as day-ahead markets and real-time markets? Can you guys think of a physical reason for that? Yeah.
Well, some have constraints for like ramping.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say there's a, oh, I should have prepared this ahead of time. There's a great YouTube video about the situation that happens in the UK. On like Sundays, there's like a famous TV show that everyone watches, and like right at the end of the TV show, everyone puts on their tea. It's like literally an increase of like 2 gigawatts of electricity demand in the span of like 3 minutes, right? And so all the operators are literally watching this TV show, and as soon as the credits start rolling, they're like, turn on, turn on, turn on, turn on, right? And so they know that this is happening, and so they can prepare for it. Now imagine that you have this big spike in demand, and you're like, oh crap, I didn't actually plan for this, and so all these things that maybe I wanted to like spin up before, I wouldn't have the opportunity because it takes too long, right? And so there's actually economic and efficiency things to think about as it relates to planning ahead and being able to turn things on and off. Versus doing it right at the moment in the real time. And so real time we think about as making sort of small adjustments because our forecast could be wrong, right? Okay, so that's kind of the sort of fundamental reasons behind why we have these 2 different markets. And to tell you a little bit about how these work, right? So day ahead, 24 hours before, we commit resources in advance, and so generators are prepared to turn on and all of that. We do have, this is where your main sort of like bids are happening that I was just doing in our example. Yeah, and we'll talk about how this kind of all settles up. The settlement for the day ahead market is probably the easiest, right? We have that clearing price that's based off of the highest bid. Everyone gets paid by KISO. Okay, and then in the real time, this is happening. There's a couple of different types of adjustments. There's a 15-minute one and a 5-minute one, and these are, again, essentially like contingencies for forecasting errors, and kind of updating your system conditions a little bit. Okay. So the way this works, generators submit bids to the day-ahead market, ISO commits the units the next day. As real-time conditions evolve, maybe the load is slightly different, maybe your renewables, like a big cloud is passing by, and so you have like a dip in your power. Maybe there's outages. So the real-time market is going to adjust your dispatch and be like, hey, hang on, I told you to turn on, but actually I need you to not turn on, or hey, I told you to turn on this much, but you actually need to turn on this much. And then it will price those settlements. It'll price those adjustments and then settle them afterwards. So generators are going to be paid and charged based on your day ahead schedules. And then everything gets trued up. The deviations get trued up in the real-time market. So if a generator is like underperforming, they have to buy back at a real-time price. If the load exceeds the forecast, your load-serving entities, that's what the LLC stand for, will pay a real-time price for the difference, right? And so in the example where I said, wait, you need to not, or let's say you're producing too much, you need to produce less, they have to buy back at this real-time price. And then if I say, oh, you need to produce more, and I'll pay you at this real-time price, which is going to be more expensive than your day-ahead market.
They buy back the deficit of what they weren't able to produce.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's like a transfer to someone else who needed to produce that power, essentially. Yeah, because you promised something, you're not able to deliver. I had to tell this other guy to turn on at a more expensive price. Now you have to pay for that. Yeah.
What's an LLC?
A load-serving entity. Load-serving entities are entities that are bringing electricity to customers. So for now, the easiest one to think about is like a utility, like PG&E. Okay. Another layer of complication into this, the LMP. So locational and marginal price, or the LMP, is the cost of supplying the next increment of electricity now at a specific location. We've been talking about this day-ahead market and real-time market kind of in the aggregate, right? We need like a total amount of load. But actually, if I were to jump back over to here really quick, I said, oh, I'm over here in Davis, which ones do I turn on? Well, okay, now I have some intuition, right? Now I know I want to turn on the cheap things first. Okay, so that might be a yellow, right, which is solar, and that has really low operating costs. So this guy turns on. Well, why not turn on like a solar guy over here, right? The operational cost is the same. But actually, the sort of real price at a location is not only dependent on the price to produce the electricity, but also thinking about the transmission system, right? And so an LMP is comprised of 3 components, okay? One is that energy cost that we've all been talking about. 2 is congestion on the transmission network. And 3 is losses in that transmission system. And so if I wanted to understand kind of the price associated with producing that marginal unit of power at a location, I not only need to know how much it costs to produce that electricity, but the fact that baked into that kind of price I need to know, oh, I lost a little bit of electricity transmitting it from, down the street versus across the state, right? And so that's kind of how you get the preference for things that are produced a little bit closer nearby as opposed to things that are far away. And then congestion on the transmission network. If your transmission line is getting used up, right, has less and less capacity, the marginal value of the electricity that you're sending through a more and more congested line goes up, right? Because it's like valuable real estate essentially. And so we want to include that congestion component in the LMP as well. Okay, any questions about LMPs? Yes.
I guess just the marginal price part of it.
Yeah, so it's basically saying something that's marginal means like the incremental amount, right? And so if I were to hit that light switch right there, I essentially the LMP related to the cost of supplying that marginal amount of electricity, if I hit that light switch, is calculated by these three things. Okay, so it's like the sort of last unit of electricity that gets produced, how much would it cost?
Like the very last one on the schedule, or the very last one that was actually produced?
It is the last one in the dispatch curve, so the last power plant. So it's the next thing that gets dispatched, plus these other two pieces. So let's say I turn on that light switch, and I request X units of power. Let's say the next power plant in the dispatch order is a natural gas plant in, I don't know, Woodland. I don't know if there's a natural gas plant in Woodland, but let's just say that there is. So the actual price, or the LMP, the cost of producing that bit of power is equal to whatever that power plant costs to produce that electricity, plus the cost to ship that electricity here, including this congestion piece, okay, and the losses in that transmission line. Okay, so maybe a little bit more concrete of example. You can actually have a lot of variation in your LMPs, and a lot of that is going to have to do with the conditions of your transmission system. Yeah, so it could be $45 per megawatt hour in one location, but $55 per megawatt hour in another location, even if the marginal generator is the same, right? And that's because the losses and congestion create a price difference. Yeah, so a constraint is that capacity limitation in that transmission line. That maybe a transmission line is totally full, right? And so you can't. So maybe there's a power plant that's producing at $45 over here in this location, and there's a power plant that produces at $55 here. Maybe that one still has room to ramp up, but that this transmission line is completely full. That could be another reason that you have a higher price here, right? Is that you actually will have to use a more expensive generator because you can't actually get the electricity from the cheap one to where it needs to be. Okay.
In that case, it seems like it makes more sense to upgrade your lines.
Maybe. Well, but this could be a once in a lifetime event. Who knows, right? In which case, maybe you don't want to build an entire transmission line for that. So, yeah, these are the types of things that you'd want to think about when you consider questions about capacity and that sort of thing. Okay, So, yeah, so LMPs, these are kind of a representation of essentially that sort of cost, again, of producing that marginal amount of electricity. So in February 2021, I'm sure you guys have heard of this. If you guys remember, so there was a big winter storm in Texas, and actually, I guess last week there was a big ice storm, and so I don't recall hearing kind of like power issues of the same scale yet, but I guess we'll see. In this particular winter storm, there was massive generation outages, like gas plants, a bunch of gas plants froze, a bunch of wind was underperforming, and there was record electricity demand. So on the load side, or on the supply side, they were screwed because a bunch of power plants went down. On the load side, they were screwed because a bunch of people were turning on heaters in the winter storm. So there was a huge imbalance, and ERCOT had a 20 plus gigawatt shortfall. That's, yeah, if you're a grid operator, you know, that is like beyond a nightmare situation. 20 gigawatts would be like, you know, the entire kind of like base load of like California, right? You're essentially losing, you have an inability to produce power to meet demand. And so what happens is that people don't get electricity, right? And so there were huge blackouts all over the place. And at the same time, when you look at the prices of producing that sort of marginal unit, some of these LMPs were hitting a cap of $9,000, $9,000 megawatt hour, which is like an absurd price, right? Usually we're thinking on the order of hundreds of dollars, tens to hundreds of dollars per megawatt.
Bigger in Texas.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, you know, there are some people I heard about. There are some like weird utility programs where you can like opt in to tie your electricity rates into like real-time prices. And so there was like a small subset of customers who ended up with like $1 million bills because of this.
And then what happened?
Huh?
Then what happened to them?
No idea. I did not look into more than the like headlines in the news. I'm sure they have.
There was a special program.
Yeah, I'm sure there's like some settlement or something. But like technically, they're I mean, you wanna get the benefits of real-time rates and not have the consequences of real-time rates. Don't sign up for that program, I guess. But yeah, I mean, that is a pretty absurd situation. So yeah, and actually prices were at that level for quite a long time, right? And so this is, yeah, this is kind of by design, right? Scarcity pricing, yeah.
Just for context, what's California's cap for machine?
I think it's like, I want to say it's 10,000, but I don't think we've ever come close
Well,
to
we have
that.
resource adequacy, they don't have that. in-
Yeah, well, so, yeah, by the equivalent of, I guess, yeah, because we're going to talk about capacity markets. I think you're asking about, so it's not about the resource adequacy, it's just about the energy price, right? So, you know, like a generator could bid at some absurd number, but I think there's a ceiling in California. I don't actually know what that number is. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
What did the load shedding look like in this case?
Yeah. So basically, they just turn off power to
Okay.
a bunch of people, right?
Do you remember like how many homes or like people
Like
actually
million.
went without power?
Like millions, right? Like for some amount of time. Yeah, and they have, you could look at the like SAIDI metrics for that event or for that year and be able to see. Yeah, what else was I gonna say? Anyways, this is like a pretty abnormal situation, so, yeah, it is possible for the market to, enter into these kind of crazy territories. And, kind of our last lecture for the course is we're gonna look at kind of these types of events, yeah.
What was like the transmission structures of Texas specifically? Because you mentioned how like it's not really divided by state. So why
Yeah.
don't they just supply power to other states?
Yeah.
Texas is special.
So Texas is special. Okay, this is like way down here. Oh man, I am not going to be able to cover markets in one day. Yeah. Okay. So we think about the transmission system kind of in this broad way. This is what's kind of known as sort of the interconnection level. So where you don't really see electricity moving in between these different regions. So ERCOT, it is the sort of Texas region, and they have kind of an isolated grid. You do have some tie, so, you know, if this was all interconnected, essentially what would have happened is if you have a bunch of power plants going down here, you could have other power kind of moving here to support, right? And yes, it would be a little bit more expensive because you're getting all these like, you know, you're getting slammed with congestion and losses, transmitting all that power. But you know, at least you could provide that electricity. But in this case, there are physical constraints as to why we can't do that. So everything in the US operates at 60 hertz, but actually, in these different interconnection regions, they are not in sync. So you can't physically send AC power directly AC to AC into ERCOT or across these interconnections. You have to do high voltage DC ties. So you change your AC into DC and then go back into AC to get around this issue of syncing, yeah.
Sorry to, I guess, go back a bit. I'm having some trouble connecting marginal price to the day ahead and real-time markets.
Yep.
So
So the energy
right,
price.
if you could just draw a curve.
Yeah. So there's no curve for LMP because that depends on location. But one way to visualize your dispatch curve is something like this. So this is marginal cost. So this is in like dollars per megawatt hour. And this is the capacity. Okay, so the first generator, let's say you've got a bunch of solar plants, right? And so this is, I should say cumulative capacity.
You said this is the.
This is called a dispatch curve.
Okay. I think all of these different pieces of information have been sort of like breadcrumbed to us over time, but to have, it would be helpful to connect them all at once.
Yeah, so every dot, so let's say this is 100, and then this is 200, 300. So this is a solar farm that gives 100 megawatts of capacity, and it costs me $0 to do it. And the next one is also a solar farm that gives me another 100, so that adds up to 200, and it costs $0, so it's still here. And then 300, maybe there's a wind farm, okay? And then maybe there's a nuclear plant here. Maybe this is like 2,500 cumulative, so I add everything up, right? And so this is a nice way of visualizing the order in which the plants turn on and how much it costs for them to produce electricity. So let's say right here, this is like 5,000. If I needed 5,000 megawatts of load, if I needed 5,000 megawatts of electricity to provide, to satisfy the load, then I can quickly just be like, okay, my clearing price is right here. right? So here, and then I'm gonna turn all of these guys on and they will get paid, you know, whatever X dollars this is. Okay. So that price is this thing.
And you said that's the marginal?
Yep,
price?
right, because that's, if I needed to produce one more unit of electricity, it would cost me this much. Right, because I would tell this generator to turn on a little bit. I mean, it could be, okay, technically I guess it could be the next thing, but yeah, usually you're not like every plant is at 100%. Yeah, you have some wiggle room. So yeah, so this is your cost. This is your marginal price, and then these two pieces are in addition to the cost of producing that electricity, the cost of like getting it to a particular location.
So is that marginal cost, is that like what the generators have bid?
Yes.
And that's only marginal because the generators are ordered, or sort of arranged in order of like, I don't know, at least. Which one goes first?
Yeah. Yeah, so that you can see that here. So, okay, I'm gonna say we do have to move on. But if you still are unsure about this, come talk to me in office hours, and then I will try and clear this up.
I'll try, it seems important.
Okay. Let's do a quick 2-minute break, because we got a lot to get through. Yeah.
Is understanding marginal price important for today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's generally an important concept to know. The easiest way I can think about it is like, there's a power plant produces electricity at $10, there's a power plant that produces electricity at $15, and there's a power plant that produces electricity at $20. If you turn the first one on all the way, and you turn the next one on all the, halfway, how much does it cost to produce one more extra unit of power?
I was not holding those numbers in my head.
Okay. Well, we can maybe try and iron this out of class. Yeah.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
On through C. If-
Oh, on homework, yes.
Yeah, if I use, like one
do you still get
sig
units for that?
for the
No.
percent here, that it just fuels back to the same input. Do you want me to
Sorry,
swing
you're
that
doing,
to sig fix?
Oh.
Doing the PC specific.
Uh,
So you get
sure.
reading,
Yeah.
Nice, nice. So you finished in yeah. On the beat? Yeah.
Okay, quick breather, back into it. So that was all about energy markets, right? And so this is all thinking about the cost to produce, the cost to produce electricity. But we actually have other markets to think about. So another sort of big one is a capacity market. So a capacity market doesn't actually care what you provide as sort of like an electricity service. It kind of just cares that you're there, okay? And so the idea is to provide payments for a resource to be available. And that is a way to ensure what's known as resource adequacy. In other words, that you actually have enough power plants on your system to meet load, right? Because we could be running into a situation on this dispatch curve where maybe the demand is out here and you just simply don't have enough power plants, right? And so the capacity market is the economic incentive to actually build the thing in place. Now, I want to say resource adequacy is here being used as a sort of generalized term, that is just meaning you have enough of that resource. In California, resource adequacy can actually refer to a specific mechanism that provides that thing. Okay, and so I'm going to distinguish that by calling it administrative resource adequacy, and then this is just kind of our general catch-all term for having enough stuff. Okay, so this is in order to ensure enough supply exists and to incentivize long-term investment. Yeah, and so this can help things like avoid blackouts in energy-only markets, Texas, where price signals may be too volatile or delayed. Okay. Okay, so how does a capacity market work? So our load-serving entities, again, these are the guys who are actually producing or procuring electricity for an end consumer. They're required not only to procure electricity, but also capacity to cover forecasted peak demand. So an ISO or RTO, which we're going to talk about in a second, are system operators, right? So these guys will conduct generally what's known as a central auction. That could be 1 year ahead, that could be multiple years ahead. Here's a little table that gives us a little bit of breakdown on what those auction horizons look like. And we're gonna talk specifically in an example of how that works in a second. So generators, storage, demand response, imports, they offer capacity at a dollar per megawatt per day. And then, so the winning resources receive capacity payments and are obligated to be available during scarcity events. So it's very similar in a way to kind of this dispatch curve. And the winning resources, instead of getting a clearing price from electricity production, they are going to receive what's known as this capacity payment. And so, whereas in our energy market, we think about you dispatch power in order to make money. In the capacity market, you just have to be there. You just have to show up, and you get paid. Okay. So there's a couple of these different regions. So PJM, New England ISO, New York ISO. These are all independent system operators in kind of the Midwest, Northeast. They have similar but different capacity market types, where they do these 3 year ahead auctions. New York ISO does these monthly ones. California ISO does not have a traditional capacity market, and we're going to talk about what they have in just a second. ERCOT, they just rely on their energy market, and so when we have crazy stuff like this happening, this is like, I guess, a weird price signal to like get more power plants. It maybe doesn't get it when you need it, but this will help, provide some kind of economic incentive. Okay. And so maybe just a little bit more justification. In energy-only markets, prices are usually low, right? We're usually operating down here as opposed to up here. And so when you think about that, what that means, it's like you're paying out at these like operating prices, right? And so you're paying out basically a lot of times what it costs people on the margin to produce that electricity. So that's actually not enough of like a revenue incentive, profit incentive to actually produce new capacity. And so, yeah, generators might be under recovering some of their fixed costs, right? If you're only bidding in on your operating costs and you're getting awarded your operating costs, yeah, you might be losing out here. But you run into this risk of insufficient capacity when demand peaks. And so the capacity markets exist as a way to bridge that gap. Okay, let's talk about this plot. And this is kind of the way that we're gonna break down in a similar way to this plot how the capacity markets work. We have, starting with here, this is our red line. And so you can actually think of this as a very similar to the way we constructed our dispatch curve, right? So this is a supply curve based on market offers. And so there's a bunch of generators, and they're going to make offers into that auction based on the cost of capacity, right? And so this is like $1 per megawatt per day or $1 per megawatt per year. And some resources are cheap. Some resources are a little bit more expensive. And so they just build this supply curve based on those market offers, right? And so you go from low to high. Okay, so that's the supply curve. Now what about the like demand curve, which is this blue line? How do we construct that? So what is that? So cone stands for costs of new entry. So that's the cost of the new entry for a marginal resource. So we look at all the resources that we have and we say, okay, how much does it cost to like add in a little bit more capacity? And we say net because we actually subtract away what they would earn from energy. And so this is the difference between that cost of the new entry minus what they would receive in payments from energy. And so that tells us essentially the difference that needs to be made up in order to incentivize someone to build, right? Okay, yeah, subtracts energy revenues, it covers what energy markets don't. What is this 1 in 10 straight up line that we have here? This is known as the loss of load expectation, or the LOLE. This is essentially deemed kind of like the reliability target. So once in 10 years, you might hit a load demand that would get you up to this amount of capacity. That's kind of the idea for this. And so it's an arbitrarily chosen target. It's a reliability target. But I suppose, it's easy enough to kind of quantify based on historical data. And the IRM is known as the installed reserve margin. And so this 1 in 10 year thing, that means that you're not regularly turning on all of these generators to meet that like crazy thing that happens once every 10 years, right? And so a lot of those generators that are there that you might want to be able to deal with a situation like that, those guys are not turning on very often, right? And so we think of that as like a reserve, right? And so that installed reserve margin is the reserve that's needed to get us to be able to deal with this particular reliability event. So the supply curve that gets constructed, that is, if you think about it, right, so they're saying, okay, 1.5 times net cone. So I put a lot of value into having some amount of capacity to deal with like things that are often happening and all the way up to things that are less likely to happen. And as they get less likely to happen, I'm gonna put less value into what I actually want in the capacity. And so I start sloping down. So they say 1.5 net cone all the way up to my reserve margin minus 3% of what's needed. And then from minus 3% up to plus 1% of my IRM, I have a slope that kind of connects that. And then I have a lot less value for things that are, let's say, a lot more extreme than this kind of reliability threshold. And because of that, I don't need it as much. So this is, it is an arbitrary curve, but it represents essentially the system's willingness to pay for reliability. And that's essentially just chosen by the system operator, yeah.
So your IRM is how far away you are to the left or right of that 1 in 10?
Kind of, this point of the IRM capacity is here minus 3%. And then here is like plus 1%, yeah.
And could you just review one more time what the loss of
Yep. So this vertical line here represents a reliability target. It's essentially, you will need this much capacity once in 10 years. Yeah.
So that's just like planning for some crazy scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
So, if I'm getting this right, so IRM is the extra margin that you would need above your peak load.
IRM is, yeah, I guess you can think it, well, what are you referring to with peak load? Like the 1 in 10 peak load or like a average peak load or something? It's just an arbitrary like reserve margin that would get you up to the 1 in 10, I guess.
The peak load that I'm referring here is the supply meets demand.
The clearing price?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, no, so the IRM is not in reference to the clearing price, it's in reference to this vertical line. And the clearing price is purely a product of the fact that the supply curve looks this way. Well, and I mean, obviously, and that the demand curve looks that way, but yeah, the clearing price doesn't have to be here, right? It could be, if the cost of the generators were like way higher, then it's possible that we deem the cost of dealing, like if this supply curve went up like this, and the clearing price were up here prior to the 1 in 10, what are we saying? We're essentially saying, well, the cost of that extra capacity, even to deal with that 1 in 10 event, is not worth it. Yeah.
So then at that set clearing price, is that what they would be paying these like backup generators?
Yep.
Exist?
Yep. So the clearing price, similar to
Yeah.
this clearing price, is what gets paid out. Yeah.
So I don't understand the demand curve at all. Why is it so high? What does the demand curve mean?
Yeah. It is an arbitrarily chosen value for how much we want to essentially deal with like reliability needs. And so here we're saying, you know, having a demand load down here is very likely, and it's also very likely here, and so on. And then as we go farther and farther to the right, our projected peak load becomes less and less likely. And so they've essentially said, well, we are gonna say that we want to value having capacity to deal with peak loads down here as higher than actually, you know, this net cone thing, which is kind of like the marginal cost of adding in another generator. They say it's worth it to like put in all these generators. And that is essentially an arbitrary decision, right? But yeah, that's the way that it's designed. Okay.
Could you tell me what was the WTP?
Oh, sorry, willingness to pay. WTP is willingness to pay. So this curve is essentially our willingness to pay for reliability. And it's really high to deal with this stuff that's more likely, and then it goes lower and lower as things get less likely, essentially. Yeah.
Willingness to pay of like the grid, or?
Yeah, okay. How would I characterize who is willing to pay? I guess the like system operator is almost like a proxy for advocating for the end consumer, right? And so they are saying, yeah, that the system operator is saying that like we value reliability kind of in this way. I think that's the right framework
because
to
it
think
would be
about
like
the stakeholder.
operating behind the retail market, right?
Yeah. It's like a system operator, right, is the one that we would,
Well, I think like the PUC would kind of like devise this, and it'd be implemented by them.
Well, it's less risk too for smaller loads, right? Like,
yeah.
it's very rare that you hit a peak load like above that 150 in this scenario. Say. So then, yeah, willingness to pay goes down.
Yeah.
Because it's just seldom.
Yeah, but I think you're right that PUC is probably the right entity that we're thinking about that would actually have the specific like requirements, or yeah, would be coming up with these particular numbers for that curve. Yeah. So, yeah, many system operators will operate in this type of capacity market or something similar, but not everyone, right? Including California. And so, what about resource adequacy in California? So, California doesn't have a traditional capacity market. Instead, it relies on what is known as, so this is where I'm talking about that distinction between terminologies, but the administrative resource adequacy. And they're essentially doing this, they're trying to get the same outcomes or similar outcomes, but in a different way. So instead of having a market, it's just straight up a regulatory requirement that says you just have to do it this way. So obligations for a load serving entity is that, okay, you have to forecast your peak loads, right? So thinking about that 1 in 10 thing, now kind of the burden is on the load serving entities to kind of identify what the chances of particular outcomes are. You must procure sufficient qualifying capacity based on those forecasts, and you have to demonstrate this compliance on a monthly and annual basis. And so now you're basically telling, like a utility, for example, you just have to have that capacity, and you have to demonstrate to me, the Public Utilities Commission, that you actually have that capacity like allocated. And so these prices, so the utility will go out and secure a lot of this stuff through contracts, and not necessarily in these mechanisms that we were just discussing where you have like a market that kind of clears. Instead, I have to go out and find, I as a utility have to go out and find those resources in order to demonstrate this adequacy. So this is often done in what's known as a bilateral contract, and all that means is that you have two parties that are making kind of agreements to do certain things with for each other. So we have our load serving entities, so this is like our utility that has to provide the electricity to our end consumers, and then we might have our resource owner, and so this might be the owner of like a power plant or something. And so the load serving entity as a buyer, they're committed to paying a fixed capacity payment to the resource owner. And that is, again, through this contract that's like totally independent of how often this person even provides electricity, right? So regardless of whether or not this person is producing electricity, the load serving entity is like, well, at least I know that you have capacity that can provide to the market.
Is this like in relation to the same way of like a power purchase agreement but for capacity?
Yes. Yeah. So in exchange for, counting the resource towards your RA obligation, your resource adequacy obligation. The resource owner promises to the load serving entity that they will make a specified amount of capacity available, right? Irrespective of the energy production. This is defined, this is during specific windows that they might want, and so your RA at different times and locations might be kind of more specific depending on, right, the sort of grid needs. Yeah, and subject to performance obligations during system stress events. Yeah.
So who's paying actually? Like who's paying the RA payments?
So the
Who's
load so PG&E
PG&E?
will pay your resource owner the money.
But that will be from their capital expenditure, no? So that'll be like socialized.
Wait, sorry, what was?
But I mean, eventually it comes back from the ratepayer, no?
Yeah, right. I mean, we pay for everything at the end of the day. Yeah, so if you're talking about in the specific contract, right, the LSE pays the resource owner. Where does the LSE get that money from? Well, they're gonna make the rest of the ratepayers in their territory kind of like pay for that, right? And the trickle down of these costs to the end customer, we'll talk about this in a lot more detail, but everything that I'm talking about, all of these costs, or the vast majority of this stuff, right, that trickles down to the end customer.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What is done to deter someone from under-predicting their peak loads? Or how is that? So like you have to say what your peak loads are, but
Yeah.
like why not just say like multiply by 0.9? Calculate your peak load and then multiply by 0.9 and then tell them that's what your peak load is and you're like taking a risk. And why doesn't everybody do that? Or like is there some sort of audit or?
Well, how would you even audit something like that? I don't actually know. I'm not
They have
sure.
Market power mitigation.
I mean, are you like just badly penalized if you underpredict, or maybe there's like you submit data to prove what your calculation was? I don't know.
Do you know the answer to
I
this?
think it's like, well, I mean, they're audited pretty heavily, so I don't think you can just get away with something like that.
Although, I mean, yeah.
Maybe there's some game theory involved.
Yeah. Because it is like a forecast, like
But,
you're gonna get it wrong.
The ISO has the Department of Market Monitoring, which is like a bunch of PhDs that just look for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I suppose, yeah, I don't know how much gaming happens with this particular question. I suppose, with the market monitoring, you are going to be able to flag suspicious stuff, right? But there's this like gray area maybe that maybe there's a little bit of gaming that happens, but yeah, I don't know.
Well, I don't know, well, I mean, that's one of like between the day and the real-time market, they have a market power mitigation run. But I don't know if that applies to
Resource adequacy,
RA
yeah.
contracts, 'cause those are kind of like outside of the motions of like the real-time data market.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I can look up some academic papers to see if anyone's thought about this. Or maybe it's a good research paper for someone
Well,
to.
it's kind of like a novel, like resource adequacy is kind of like a novel.
It is a
thing
little bit,
specific to California, the CAISO market.
yeah.
So I'm sure there are some like kinks to work out, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess what I'd say is, yeah, we think of this as kind of like purely this bilateral contract, but yeah, you might argue that there's kind of this like third party involved, right? So CAISO, they're the ones who will actually verify that a particular resource qualifies. They're going to confirm like its deliverability or its ability to deliver the service. And they're the ones who may actually call on a particular resource during emergencies, right? And they're the ones who enforce the performance obligations. Yeah, so Your question is kind of on the inverse of this, where you're like constantly overperforming. I guess on the flip side of things, right? CAISO is the one who assesses penalties, and then PUC will enforce compliance with these things. And I suppose that they would also be the ones logically to try and think about this problem on the other side. If you are fudging your forecast to like overperform, I assume that's gonna look kind of suspicious, right? Yeah, so not exactly sure, but.
I think you're missing these last slides on the.
Yeah, they're not on the slide deck.
Oh, shoot, I added these like yesterday, sorry. So I will re-add the PDF into Canvas after this lecture. Yeah, sorry, there's just a handful of all the resource adequacy stuff I realized was a hole in my capacity piece that I was talking about. So I'll add these back in after the lecture. Okay, what qualifies as resource adequacy capacity? So these are things that are physically available during defined windows, they're deliverable to load, they're measurable and verifiable, and they're able to respond during emergencies. And so there's like a couple of examples of common things that are used for resource adequacy. So thermal generation and storage are kind of the big ones. And then increasingly, some demand response. Yeah, and the qualifications there are a little bit more, a little bit more stringent because there are particular requirements that you need for RA, right? And then, imports with certain limitations can actually act as RA capacity. And just to complicate things even more, you do have like different layers of resource adequacy. We think about constraints that happened in the entire system, but there are also constraints that might be happening in slightly more local areas, right? If you're like transmission constrained and your LMPs are like always really, really high, for example. So system RA, this is the resource adequacy to cover the entire state. Local RA is to think about capacity in constrained transmission zones. And then flexible or net peak RA is even a different level of RA that thinks specifically about like ramping and evening net load peaks. And so we think about things like the duck curve, right, as a pretty unique situation to California based on their sort of generation portfolio. And so this type of resource adequacy can maybe help deal with this sort of, big ramp event, is having flexibility types of resources. Yeah, and so California is a little bit unique in the way that they do things. And there is kind of an open question as to what system is necessarily better, right? And so you do have arguments for a more sort of market-based mechanism, which will have better like price transparency, right, versus a resource adequacy system where maybe you can respond to policy needs in a more agile way than the way that traditional capacity markets have worked. Okay, any questions or thoughts? Which ones do you guys like more? Capacity markets or RA? Yeah.
It actually goes back to that graph that you showed of 1 in 10.
Yeah, this thing.
So my question is that why are we choosing a probabilistic standard such as 1 in 10 than a deterministic standard with supply meets demand to find the reserve margin?
What was the last thing that you said?
So why are we choosing a probabilistic standard such as 1 in 10 than a deterministic standard such as supply meets demand? So I could literally on a basis, I could say that supply meets demand, from that I would take a 10% more reserve margin. Well, why am I not doing that instead of a probabilistic standard such as 1 in 10?
Yeah, so, I mean, the decision on how reliable you want to build your system is kind of an arbitrary one, right? So when you're talking about, you're saying it's deterministic where you just take the peak and you add a bunch of like reserve margin on top of it. But like, that's for the past, right? I don't know, now you've got a bunch of electric vehicles and heat pumps and all these extra load things. Your peak in the future might exceed your like 10% extra reserve off of like a historical peak, right? So, the degree to which you decide a particular reliability metric, to me, is like pretty arbitrary, right? It's why are we choosing a line here as opposed to at another place? Yeah. Yeah.
Is that red curve similar to the dispatch curve?
Yes. Yeah. Kind of in the sense that, except that it's thinking about capacity as opposed to the marginal energy production. All right. The last market we'll talk about are ancillary services. So we've talked about energy and we've talked about capacity. And so there is an additional sort of market for resources that provide sort of specialized functions, right? And so this might be things that provide support for like voltage and frequency to stay within certain limits. And so we have a market for that because I may actually value the ability of a resource to spin up a lot faster, right? In case I have like some kind of reliability event, some like voltage excursion, or my frequency is like dipping, right? And so these may be better suited to balance supply and demand at like a finer resolution. And so we want to value those things, and that's done through this sort of ancillary services market. So provide reserves in case of like a generator trips or load spikes, maintain voltage stability. Also, you could do things like being able to start up from a black start faster from a blackout. So these are called black starts. So that would be faster grid restoration after you have an outage. Different types of ancillary services. So regulation, this is like automatic fine tuning. This happens, so we're gonna talk about how in reality, when you do dispatch, how this sort of operates. So we'll come back to this in a later lecture. And then we've got spinning and non-spinning reserve. So this spinning reserve is essentially like a generator that's already sort of spinning, and it's synchronized with with the phase of our electricity. And so it's like ready to essentially produce that electricity. So it has typically a faster response time.
Is that like grid inertia?
Yeah, so, right, when you have your AC kind of moving in this phase, your generator has to be spinning in sync with that, right? And so if you had a generator that was just off, which we'll call like a non-spinning reserve, then not only do you need to like start spinning up to produce the electricity, you also need to get into sync with the phase of electricity in your grid. And so a spinning reserve is something that's already spinning, and it's like in sync with the phases, with the electricity phase, and so you can connect it a lot faster, essentially. Yeah. So that's the difference between your spinning and non-spinning reserve. You have some voltage support to maintain voltage. Via reactive power. And then, yeah, black start capability. This is the idea that you can start your grid from 0 after a blackout in a sort of faster way. And so different types of services that have some value that can be incentivized. Okay, when we break down into capacity market, your wholesale, this is your energy market, and your ancillary services, right? We've now talked about our kind of three markets or pseudo markets. Where is that sort of relative value? This is some example out of some paper looking at this in Europe, but in general, the like order of these things is gonna look something like this, where generally your wholesale, your energy market kind of dominates, followed by your capacity market, and then your ancillaries. Although the ancillary value can be larger or smaller depending on the particular type of generating technology, right? But yeah, generally you're gonna look something like this, where wholesale is the thing that's gonna be like making you the most money in a given year. Okay, questions? All right. So that covers this. That is our kind of whirlwind through electricity markets. That's the sort of main ones to keep in mind: energy, capacity, ancillary, and kind of in that order for magnitude. And now we're going to talk about operators. Who are the stakeholders and players in the sort of electricity system, and what do they do? Okay, so I talked about this. We have our three major sort of interconnections, everything within an interconnection. That's where your electricity is in sync. Flows between your interconnections need high voltage DC tie, which is how you can get things out of sync across these different interconnections. And the size of the ties are not that big, right? So east-west through all of this is about 2 to 3 gigawatts. ERCOT has limited ties totaling about 1 gigawatt, right? And so when Texas had that extreme event where they were out a delta of 20 gigawatts between demand and load, WEC in the east can only help out so much. Okay, so I've been kind of alluding to this even since the game that we played at the beginning, right? The system operator, they are the ones who coordinate all of the power plants. So in California, we've talked about, and we've heard about CAISO, right, a lot. A lot of you guys, I think, have had a chance to visit CAISO. And so they are the ones essentially coordinating and telling power plants and dispatching power plants to turn on. But actually, not everywhere in the US uses an independent system operator. And so there's kind of these three categories that I'm going to talk about. Independent system operator, a regional transmission organization, also known as an RTO. These guys are fairly similar. We'll talk about some of the nuances between them in a moment. And then you've got your balancing authorities, or BAs. Well, so balancing authority is more of a catch-all term for that actually includes ISOs and RTOs. But you also have non-ISO BAs. And they are also, as responsible as an ISO or RTO for balancing electricity supply and demand in real time. Yeah, so all of these are going to balance supply and demand, and that is the central job of a balancing authority. All ISOs and RTOs are balancing authorities, but not all balancing authorities are ISOs or RTOs. We're gonna do a quick aside. So there is an additional agency that you need to be aware of. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. This is an independent federal agency that regulates the interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil, and they also oversee electricity markets. So regulate interstate transmission, approve rates, tariffs, and rules. And so, yeah, this is relevant, right, for our wholesale markets, oversee reliability standards, adjudicates interconnection and transmission disputes, and reviews and approves regional transmission plans and cost allocation. And so FERC is, the federal authority that oversees a lot of these balancing areas, right? They establish the market rules and structures that are used by ISOs and RTOs, or I should say they approve a lot of those rules and structures, or give allowances to structure them in certain ways. And then on the transmission side, they define how interconnection queues are managed, and they oversee cost allocation of transmission and planning processes. And so FERC can give these regulatory orders, and so this is just a table of some of the more significant orders that have come out of FERC, and kind of what they've done. Yes?
Is this like a similar deal where states can they preempt the federal agency's orders in a way of
No. FERC, yeah.
Well, only Texas.
Yeah. The ISOs and the RTOs, the balancing authorities, all play under FERC rules, essentially.
And they can't be stricter or less strict? Is there one way or another?
I wouldn't really put it that way. It's more that FERC determines the things that they're allowed to do, kind of, yeah. Yeah, so we're not going to talk too much more about FERC. It is the entity that, I think the most important thing is thinking about a lot of the market rules and the structures of the ISOs and RTOs that we kind of talk about throughout this class. A lot of them are influenced or determined by FERC.
Can you go back just a second?
Yes.
So, I think I've forgotten the difference between a rate and a tariff. What is the difference?
A rate, so if we think about it from a customer standpoint, right? So the rate is what you pay for electricity for this particular good. And then tariffs are taxes, right? That may be levied on certain things, and that could affect your end rates. Okay. Let's talk about vertically integrated utilities. So we've covered, right, all of that physical infrastructure over the last couple of weeks. So you have generators, you have transmission lines, you have distribution systems. And there is a question, so who owns all of that stuff? In what is known as a vertically integrated utility, right, and so this is a term in economics, right, that we refer to thinking about vertical integration as capturing all of the things that would go into providing a good and service. If that's all vertically integrated, that means the utility, in this particular example, they own the distribution system, they own the transmission system, they own the generations, all of the generators. And there are worries about sort of monopolistic behavior in this case, right? And so what's to stop the utility from, messing with your dispatch curve and like saying, oh, all the generators are producing at a much higher marginal cost than they are, or that, oh, actually I see all this, congestion on my transmission system, and that everyone needs to pay a lot more money, right? So there are like, without competition, right, you have worries about adverse outcomes from the fact that it's you have vertical integration.
Like delaying ramping up power plants to increase congestion in the entire process.
Yeah, you could do that. That could be an example. So prior to the 1990s, investor-owned utilities were vertically integrated and provided generation, transmission, and distribution. And they are monopolies. They operate as regulated monopolies within, particular service areas. And then the regulation really kicks in where you have rate setting. In other words, how much customers are paying for electricity. And that's via this like cost of service regulation. So essentially, public utilities commissions are setting regulations to prevent rates from going too high. And then you have planning from centralized and long-term. So this is like an integrated resource planning. So the key characteristics of these vertically integrated utilities, so there's no wholesale markets. So everything is done by bilateral contracts, right? And so the utility might be making a contract with a generator, maybe if it's like outside of your service territory, or an internal dispatch. And so this is where maybe more the gamesmanship gets played a little bit. You have a bunch of power plants and you say, actually I'm gonna turn this more expensive guy on first, and that means I'm gonna be able to make more money because my clearing price is gonna be higher. Well, okay, sorry, I shouldn't say that, not clearing price higher. The cost of producing electricity is higher, and so I'm gonna tell the PUC, no, it cost me $10 million to produce all of this electricity, and so we're gonna set rates at this, right? So yeah, this idea that you have internal dispatch might be problematic. Limited access for independent power producers, and so, utility owns all of these power plants, and then you, as this independent person, you're like, oh, I wanna build this wind farm. That might be a lot harder for you to do, right? Because the utility might say, no, we're just gonna use our own power plants. Don't even bother, right? This is a very big simplification, right? But it's gonna be harder as an independent power producer to be able to participate in a market that's being controlled entirely by the utility. And then little transparency in price competition. Okay, so in the mid-90s, we had FERC Order 888. And so this is the big one that we refer to as deregulation. And so when you talk to electricity people and you say the word deregulation, everyone knows, like, this is essentially, these two FERC orders are essentially what you're talking about. So this is essentially, Big Brother coming in and breaking up your monopoly, right? So require open access to transmission lines for all generators, right? I should mention that's like another way that you could prevent independent power producers from being able to participate, right? As I as a utility own all the transmission, and so you build this wind farm over here, and the utility says, sorry, I'm not gonna allow you to use my transmission lines to like ship power to customers, right? So that could be, so open access to transmission prevents that from happening. Non-discriminatory transmission tariffs, so same type of deal. instead of saying, oh, you're not allowed to use this transmission line, you know, the utility might say, sure, you can use this transmission line, and it's going to cost you 10 times more than it would, you know, for me to use a transmission line for a different generator, right? So no discrimination of transmission costs, and then encourage the formation of our independent system operators, right? That we now is like so central to the way that power is dispatched, right? It was not so long ago that these didn't exist. Yeah, and then formalizing regional markets. So this is voluntary creation of regional transmission organizations, RTOs, to manage transmission and wholesale markets. And all of the goal of deregulation and restructuring this whole thing and like forcing utilities to sell off their generation assets and all that. So this is to try and introduce competition, efficiency, reliability into your market, right? So before restructuring, PG&E, they owned all the distribution, all the transmission, all the generation. After restructuring, they are no longer allowed to own, okay, caveat, they had to sell off most of their generation assets. I guess technically they still own the nuclear plant, right? I believe. So the vast majority of generators were kind of sold off, and so PG&E is now more of a like wires utility. So they own much of the transmission system and much of the distribution system.
What are those two things up there?
These things, these are specific generation assets that PG&E was allowed to retain, which I believe are nuclear and some hydro. But they don't own all the distribution, right? UC Davis, we get our own, not owned by PG&E. Oh, yes, sorry.
How did the formation of RTOs? I don't understand.
Are you asking about how RTOs let you do these things?
I was going to, but then I realized I don't really understand what an RTO is.
Okay, I haven't talked about RTOs, so it's similar to an ISO, but let's talk about the differences. So independent system operator, nonprofit, independent entity, right? So ISO, actually ISO, a lot of people think is like a government agency, but it's actually just an independent entity that operates transmission system and administers our wholesale market. An RTO is a different sort of entity that's designated by FERC, and they have to meet specific requirements. So they have to cover some kind of region, there has to be a planning authority, congestion, they have to provide congestion management, and independent governance. When, at a practical level, when you look at what an ISO does and an RTO does, it's gonna look pretty similar a lot of the times. Yeah, same sort of subcategory. Like RTOs are, you can think of this as a subcategory of an independent system operator, but they're gonna have specific requirements on certain things to do a little bit more.
Is SMUD like an RTO?
No. SMUD is a generic balancing authority. Or no, sorry, SMUD is part of a specific just balancing authority, generic balancing authority, yeah.
So what's WAPA, WTA?
Yeah, we'll talk about, I have a little example about WAPA next class. But I don't know that much about it. You can chime in maybe next class. Yeah, if you're around, but.
I'll bring our contracts to read.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's actually, it's kind of funny because so next class we're going to talk about utilities, and I have all these examples of like the generic types of utilities. And I was like, okay, we've like covered the big ones. And then I was thinking about WAPA, and I was like, okay, this WAPA actually doesn't fall into any of the categories that I sort of generically outlined. So I have this little special case study of just what, kind of how WAPA works. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I did my best, but we're like, yeah. Well, we'll start off here next time, and we'll play a little bit of catch up. So a lot to digest. If this is new to you, we're flying through a lot of material. Come to office hours. I'm happy to try and clarify some of this stuff. Yeah.
I hope you're ready to give this like whole lecture over again.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is like my first time teaching this, so I'm trying to like figure out how to balance all of this material. So. Okay. See you guys on Thursday.